Welcome to episode 6 of The Hat of Many Things with me, your host, Mike, and my co-host,
Tom.
Joining us again after the Gen Con special are Will and Wade. Say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
One of you got it right. Okay, so we're talking about board games today, and we're talking about board games as a more expanding topic rather than simply Gen Con and what caught our eye. What is a board game? Let's, in its most simplest form, I think we concluded that it's anything played on a table. Really? There are various subcategories. You can separate wargaming, you can separate tabletop miniature games, which often cross over, and you can separate card games or things just played on an individual board. How important are these distinctions to you guys as hobbyists?
Not.
I can't really imagine playing something like Twister on a table, and that's often considered like a board game as well.
I would find it difficult to play Twister on a table.
But the world is your board.
It would also be quite dangerous.
It will be that, yeah.
But what's that board game, the one where you have to like hide the thing around the house?
Sounds like hide and seek.
I can't remember what it's called.
I was going to say, it just sounds like hide and seek with an
No,
object.
it's-
How is that a board game?
No, there are different.
That's not a board game, that's grounding a child, Tom.
There are different cards, and you have these like wooden pieces that you have to do certain things with, depending on what comes out on the card. And one of those things
Are you making
is
things up again?
hide it around the house. No, it was on the Penny Arcade. I don't know if you saw Penny Arcade a while back. Did a Kickstarter, and one of the things that came out of that was they had a like reality TV show where they found new webcomic artists and they made them play it. I think it's called like Jungle Rush.
It's a vicious dexterity game.
There's Jungle Speed.
Jungle Speed, that might be it.
It's a speed game.
Yeah, it's a dexterity game, but one of the things is you have to hide the thing somewhere, right?
Not in Jungle Speed, no.
Yeah, I've never heard of this.
Bringing us back on topic, if we exclude collectible card games like Magic the Gathering, and if we exclude open-ended tabletop war games like Warhammer or Warhammer Hordes, what genres are we left with?
I mean, it's difficult. There are a lot of things out there. I mean, you could ask, what about things like Two Rooms and a Boom?
No. It is a social game. It is not a board game.
Does that make, I would call it possibly party game?
Yeah, it's a party game. But is it a board game?
Yes, it's a party game. But some party games are board games.
You know, like Pin the Tail on the Donkey is a party game.
Is that a board game?
Yes. It's not a very good one, though.
Or Musical Chairs.
But it doesn't have a physical board.
Musical Chairs and Pin the Tail on the Donkey have physical components you have to interact with.
But musical chairs?
I think you'll find Pin the Tail on the Donkey requires both a tail and a donkey, and possibly a pin.
No, I wouldn't classify Two Rooms and a Boom as a board game. But it is a party game.
I mean, but it's been designed.
Tom, everything's been designed unless it occurs in nature.
Ah, those musical chair trees.
It fucking doesn't, mate. How many tailless donkeys have you seen running around with...
I don't know, Winnie the Pooh.
That's not nature.
Also, that's an ass.
Oh, my childhood has been ruined. How will I cope?
So yeah, Tom, tie-breaking vote here. Two Rooms and a Boom, board game or not?
I can see why people would say it's a board game. You'd get it in the same shop you would buy a board game, but it doesn't involve a board. Therefore, I think it's probably not a board game, but it's a type of game I would play with the same people I play board games with. Hedging my bets there.
Politically correct.
Typical non-committal answer from Tom.
Today, Tom will be playing... Look, a neutral country. Fuck it, Ireland. There we go.
You mean like Switzerland?
Switzerland is the one I was fucking thinking of.
Ireland's too busy having
fucking
famines to be neutral.
So that game where you have to find something hidden around the house, is it a potato, Tom?
It's not a potato. I will find this video and I will make sure it's in the show notes.
Alright, okay, that's fine. You put it there, but I'm not going to watch it. So, you know, we've got different categories, which we've not even started to explore. Let's go back to the question. We have social games and party games.
We can talk about, like, the purest form of gaming, which I suppose would be the abstract series of games, so chess, checkers.
Would that be like, so that would be like Go?
Yes. Go, chess, drafts. Those are the standard ones.
Tack.
What? You mean noughts and
tack.
crosses?
No,
that's tic-tac-toe.
What's tack?
It's got nice large wooden pieces, hasn't it?
It's going in the show notes, tell you that much.
I think someone at work bought it
It's
recently.
not the one that's in Terry Pratchett as well, isn't it? It's an abstract game where you've got lots of wooden pieces.
Nope, that's Thud.
No, there is a game called Tack, and you can buy it.
Tack is, once again, from Name of the Wind.
Ah, okay.
Get my universes confused.
Yeah, The Name of the Wind is a board... it's not a board game, it's a book by Patrick Rothfuss. Meanwhile, the Terry Pratchett-related one is Thud. So, they're the abstract ones. What else have we got?
Deck builders.
Okay. Do they have a board? Are they board games? Ooh.
Well, see, that's interesting because yes, they are, even though some of them won't typically have a physical board. But a lot of deck builders tend to have extra components and other things that would make them a board game and not a card game.
We've
Even though
just
they're played
spoken
with
about
cards.
games which don't have boards as being board games.
Because they're on a table. I'm not saying
Again,
that my
to
logic
our
is
topic.
Don't play
Invalid.
werewolf at a table.
I'm just saying that my opinion is that Two Rooms and Room is not a board game, whereas a deck builder such as Dominion is.
Werewolf at a table. It's a card game, surely.
So, yeah, we've got the deck builders, we've got the social deduction games, we've got the abstract games. There's, city builders?
City builders aren't kind of really their own thing. Actually use other mechanics.
Engine building games. You got co-op and competitive. Will and I have discussed before how a lot of cooperative games in particular are essentially the same game with a reskin. They're a beat the deck game.
Raving against the machine.
There are territory control games,
Worker placements.
which Will and I have different. Yeah, Will and I have different names. There's worker placement games. And what else have we got?
Got shuffleboarding games.
What's a shuffleboarding game?
It's called Smash Up. There's an
that's
example of
just
a
a card
shuffleboarding game called Smash Up
game.
where you have several components of a deck
It's
and
like a
combine them
card
together.
game.
However,
no,
what
it's
is a
bit more
shuffleboarding
than
game?
that,
Go on,
really, because everything's pre-constructed.
Is that not just a deck builder?
Yeah, you could do that as well.
I would classify Smash Up as an area control game because that's the main mechanic. The shuffle building, I'm doing quotation marks there, but you can't see, is just a preamble to set the game up. Afterwards, it's area control.
Okay, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to prompt another round of quickfire for anyone who's not listened to our podcast before or partaken in it. Quickfire is where we take turns to name something and then respond. So I'm going to name a game. We'll go round top to bottom in our chat list. So that means that following me will be Wade. I'm going to name a game, and you're going to tell me what genre you think it is.
Okay.
That way, we might pick up on a genre that we may have missed or not. So I'll start with Near and Far.
Near and Far. I haven't played Near and Far.
I have.
I don't know how it works.
Oh no, yeah. Anyone can answer the question.
Oh, I see.
It's just
Right,
you make the next suggestion.
Oh,
It's a worker placement game with some extra exploratory stuff on the
And
side.
that's something you're going to pick up on a lot as we discuss games. Everything is a something game with, and it's the with that makes them different. Okay, Wade, game.
let's go for Formula D.
That's the racing game, right?
It is the racing game, and it was one we hadn't come up with yet, so I thought I'd list it.
Is that the one where you collect cubes and put them into a bag?
No.
Like an engine building game or deck building but with cubes?
No, that's automobiles.
Oh.
I've not played Formula D. Is it like a race game, a standard race? Like, is it like Russian Crush, or is it different from Russian Crush?
It's a racing game where you have dice that are your gear, and so you can choose to go up a gear, and then you use a bigger dice, and then the dice has higher numbers on it. That's how many spaces you move, but you have to stop in each corner a certain number of times or take wear, and you can blow up if you take enough wear because you're a spoon. Don't drive your car properly.
Fair enough.
I took that far too literally until you added a caveat.
So what would you define it as, Wade?
Oh, it's a racing game.
Just race. Oh, okay.
Would that be like around the board then, but where you've got to land on certain squares?
No, it's a game.
You're making it sound a little bit like racing car snakes and ladders.
I mean, it is, but you get to choose how. So the thing that makes it a racing game and not just roll and move is the push your luck element of it, which is a different genre altogether.
So it's racing car snakes and ladders with risk. Oh, is this going to turn into board game hipsterism, where everyone's trying to name games no one else has played? Yeah, Will.
Twilight Imperium, Rex, Last Days of an Empire.
4X strategy.
Oh, no, you're getting it confused with the actual Twilight Imperium.
Oh, okay, right.
No, it's it's a completely different game.
Yeah, I can't remember how it worked, but definitely strategy. I can't remember if there's any roles. Yeah.
It's a strategy. Yeah, it's like a strategy game, but with negotiation aspects. There's a lot to it. It's a good game.
Okay. Yeah, fair.
Scythe.
Engine builder / worker placement.
Scythe is a typical heavy Euro game.
Yes.
Wait.
Puerto Rico.
Again, another very heavy Euro game.
But what's the main
I
mechanic?
can't actually remember the main mechanic of it. I just remember it being a dry Euro game.
Role selection. Well, that's a whole genre of games.
Top.
Role selection.
There we go. And there's one we hadn't missed, and that's the point in this quickfire. Tom.
Time stories.
Oh, nice. That.
I don't know, but all I know is that I want to play it.
What is the genre of that?
And that's why I said it. I wanted to see what people thought.
An interactive storybook. I don't think it's really a game.
A problem
It's a puzzle,
optimization game.
Really? That's
But
what
it has a
is.
story, a large story element.
Puzzle.
Puzzle, yeah.
It looks like the cover of every Orbit fantasy novel.
Well, Wade and I have played 2 rounds of it now, 2 different missions. So we've played the game 6 times.
It's something that I'm keen on playing.
And it's very good.
It's something I do want to play.
I'm sure you can borrow our copy at some point. But obviously we can't play it because we know how it ends.
Oh, that means I don't need to buy it. Great. Will.
Aquasphere.
What?
I've not heard of
I've
it.
never heard of that, yeah.
Oh, okay. There are other games with the same mechanic.
Congratulations. +1 hipster point.
Mechs and Minions is another game with the same mechanic.
Oh, that's a miniature game.
No, it's no
MOBA?
such thing as a miniature game. It's not a type of game.
Yeah, but there's no such thing as a miniature game, is there? All miniature games are something with miniatures.
It's a programming game.
Is it a wave defeating game?
No, it's not a wave defeating game at all. Though that's something that appears in lots of games, especially in co-op games. It's a programming game, is what it is.
Which
programming.
is?
In
Enlighten me.
programming games, you have a series of actions that you undertake, you define what you're going to do beforehand, you put them into a system or a machine, and then it takes steps after another and another to do it.
Other examples, Lords of Zidit and Robo Rally.
Yeah, those are other good examples.
Battlestar Galactica.
Hidden Role.
Yeah, cooperative hidden role.
Traitor game.
Well, yeah. The person who's got a hidden role is not necessarily cooperative.
So it's a cooperative beat the deck with a twist.
It's
Yeah.
really cooperative now because you've got...
The twist being hidden roll.
Yeah, the hidden role has like a traitor thing going on. So it's got 2 teams.
Wade?
Honshu.
I've never heard of that.
Me neither.
I'm pretty sure you're just making shit.
I'm not. I'm just thinking of a game that has a genre we haven't mentioned yet.
That's alright. Explain it to us.
It's a trick-taking game, essentially. Trick-taking city building.
Oh, that sounds interesting. How does that work?
I've taken all your cities and now they're mine.
You have cards with numbers on,
Right.
and you play your card into the middle.
Oh.
And whoever played the highest number gets to choose the cards out of all the ones that people put in to add to their city. And then you have to put the card in. Each card has 6 squares on it, so it's a 3x2. And the rule for placing is at least one of your squares has to be under or over another card. So it can't be just on the
Right.
table loose. It just has to be tucked under somewhere. And you're trying to squish things together in certain
see.
ways. Things score in different ways.
Kind of sounds like an auction mechanic.
Point salad as well.
Tom.
I was going to pick one that I had an inordinate amount of fun playing. Ugtect.
You really are just making shit up now, guys.
Mike, I told you about this one when I played it, because I played it at
Tumbleweed.
Nationals. This is...
Well, I guess
I
none
would
of
say-
you have ever played Mike's the Best, and we're all going to buy him food, so...
So Ugtect, I would say co-op is like it's the main way to describe it, but it's a building game, as in a physical building game, where you aren't allowed to talk using English. You have a set list of actions that must be described in the language of Ugg. So Ugtect is what you say when you've got the thing in position. It's an architecture game. You're literally building something.
Oh, that sounds really annoying.
It's very funny.
I think I've played a French version of this.
What's
I think
it
my
called
sister
in
has
French?
It. I don't remember what it's called in French, but you
Ugtech.
have to do something similarly bizarre, such as like replace the first syllable of every word you say and create words
Le baguette.
using cards that you draw. It might not be the same game, but it's similar.
Hors d'oeuvre. Yes, this is the last one.
Okay, so I'll say like a few games which all share a mechanic,
Okay.
and that's the mechanic we're after. Innis, Blood Rage, Sushi Go.
Drafting.
Well, it was dudes on a map
Yeah, they're all
until we got
drafting
Sushi
games.
Go. Yeah, drafting. And drafting's almost always card related too.
Yes, but you can draft other things.
Yes,
Yeah.
but
Draft
you can also
cards.
draft dice.
You can draft cards, you can draft dice, you can draft cubes.
And a term that's been thrown around already is Euro. Now, I've been living with Will for a year, and I still don't know what the fuck this means, except it's made in Europe. Apparently, European games and American games, or at least that it's of a European design philosophy. And so these European and American design philosophies, I don't know anything about them, except that European design philosophy is supposedly friendlier in some way, and the American design philosophy, I can only assume, is disparaged somewhat by the fact that it's called Ameritrash instead of just America.
Oh, it's a bit more than that. There's schools of design almost between the US and Germany, really. So there's like German design games, which are the Euro games, and there's American design games. So like two schools, there's the American School of Design and the European School.
And there's context I really needed. So, Will, you take Germany, and then Tom can take the United States, and we'll see where you agree and disagree on what you say.
Thank God you missed me out here, because I know the if you gave me a game, I could tell you which it is, but I couldn't give you a definition for either.
The thing is, they're not easy to define in any way, because they mean different things to different people. If you ask one group of players what a Euro game is, they will tell you something completely different from another group of Euro gamers. Or if you even geographically, if you go to France, they'll tell you a Euro game is one thing, and in Germany, a different thing. When I started in the hobby, and this wasn't actually all that long ago, what Eurogame meant when I first heard the term was a game which doesn't have player elimination. So all players, they join the game, they play through the game together, and they will end the game together, and then will be decided.
And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the first really popular examples of this was a Ticket to Ride.
Yes.
It's difficult to define, really, because it's kind of associated with the German European School of Design, which is... the games have an elegance around them. More than anything else. So, again, it's a term which really is defined by its opposing term. The Ameritrash games are one thing, the Eurogame are another. So, whereas Ameritrash would have X, Y, and Z feature, Eurogame would have all these other features.
Which we will get to next.
They tend to be dry and drop a lot of the theme, preference of mechanical simplicity or elegance. They're not necessarily easier games or less complex games. There are some incredibly brain-burning Euro games out there. But it's gone on to mean more than that over time.
If I were to add anything, I'd say typically Euro games have more than one way to score points or attain victory.
But that's not like a defining feature.
I mean, my limited experience, I've always associated it somewhat with hidden scoring as well, or surprise scoring. And that way people don't get discouraged from continuing to play because there's always a chance they could be winning.
Yeah, hidden scoring is often associated with Euro games. But this in itself has created like an issue within board gaming where it's created social situations. Because when you're designing board games, you're designing social interactions for whatever duration of the game. So up to 2 hours, say, that you're going to be sitting and playing with someone. And you have to sit down at a table and you can't leave because you're stuck in this game. And that's not really healthy.
Depending who's playing and what, it's a target audience thing, isn't it, really? I mean, it's not healthy for the way that a lot of the board gaming community works, in that they get together at an event, at a place, they partake in a game.
Sure, but
there are various people playing various games. Whereas it's potentially better for, say, a small group of friends who are playing a game because no individual is being sort of forced out of the game and sort of left out somewhat while their friends continue to play. So it has its benefits and its drawbacks from what you're saying, but that depends on the individual group and the group's needs.
Sure, but then there's also all the other Ameritrash games, which don't necessarily have player elimination, for example, so you can just fall out and drop out and then join back in later. Or, yeah, I think it's a problem that game designers can and should resolve.
Yeah, so it used to be simple, but as board games have grown and got more complicated, it's become almost too broad a term. And should maybe be narrowed down with some of these other games be getting their own terms now.
Yeah, like I said, they're kind of defined these days, one against the other. There's no it's become more complex as time has gone on because more and more types of games come out. Whenever a new game comes out with a new mechanic, that tends to be a Eurogame, but you tend to have the more popular games be on the other side of this discussion.
So Eurotrash is almost defined by not being Ameritrash.
Yes, definitely. That's why we were speaking
they
about
go
the
hand in
different
hand.
mechanics with creating families of games. I mean, there are even hybrids of the two that combine the worlds together. The very first game I bought, a game called Warrior Knights, had this excellent mechanic within it. It's very elegant, but it also had player elimination and direct conflict and a strong medieval theme that you would come to associate perhaps moreover with the other side, with the Ameritrash genre. But this mechanic within it where you had a series of cards in your hands and you would shuffle them together, and then you would look at your hand, and you had the ability to select 3 actions to turn. They went into 3 different decks, but you wouldn't know what order your cards would come out of that deck, and those cards dictated what happened on your turn, so you were kind of having to plan against what your opponents were doing. It's one of the very first games I really had to buy, Warrior Knights, for that very reason. But yeah, it's getting more and more complicated to define these things as more and more games which... they're fan-made definitions, really. They're not strict rules. I think it's easier to define it by the schools of design, which are more associated with the geographical area that you have on either side of the Atlantic.
So, Tom, Ameritrash game design. Shoot.
Okay, so, yeah, starting from what Will just said, where the initial definition of a Eurogame was one where you didn't have people being knocked out, there is more of a focus on player-to-player conflict and kind of the chances of a character being knocked out or whatever is a lot higher. Basically, they're probably more themed. Eurogames obviously now have themes as well, but there will be a very strong theming, often different races or different factions with different abilities, player-to-player conflicts, and there's often a fair amount of luck involved as well. But it also kind of covers those kind of strategy games that you might talk. It also kind of covers strategy games, things like that. Those are kind of seen as American style. There's a list of examples on Board Game Geek, such as Arkham Horror, Battlestar Galactica, Axis and Allies, Cosmic Encounter, Twilight Imperium. So they're those kind of games.
Okay, so how is Arkham Horror fitting in this? If there's no player elimination in Arkham Horror, and there's no player conflict in Arkham Horror, it's a cooperative beat the deck game. How is that Ameritrash?
It is. I think the point there is it's highly themed and that you have characters that are different. So every character has different abilities. Whereas in a Eurogame, everyone is often, not all Eurogames, hashtag not all Eurogames, but in Eurogames you would assume that most players are on an equal footing for the game.
So one of the things I'm getting from the Ameritrash is that it's actually less about the mechanic and more about the fact that they're selling based on the IP instead of the game mechanics. Whereas the Eurogames are selling on the game's mechanics rather than the IP.
Yeah, that's a fair way of comparing the two. Like we mentioned, there are designers which will create just Eurogames, and then there are designers which are really good at throwing out an awful lot of Ameritrash. So, and then games that define both definitions, that it's not easy to generalise here, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and looking at the list of designers you provided us with, Will, you can see that there are designers that effectively their second game is very similar to their first game, but with a different theme. And that a lot of these designers essentially seem to be reproducing the same game with a twist instead of coming up with a new game. We've discussed European design philosophy, American design philosophy. Let's talk intensity. I mean, what defines a heavy game versus a light game? Is it as literal as it sounds? How heavy is the box? Does a heavy box imply a big, long game?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I'd say if you picked up a game and it's heavy, the chances are it's heavier by this second definition, but not necessarily. Personally, I think heavier comes down to the amount of kind of intricacies between various mechanics in the game. So, some games can have just a couple of mechanics, and there would be like light. Like Ticket to Ride is light. Realistically, there's only like 3 mechanics, and they are playing cards, and tickets, and that's about it. Like, how many more mechanics are there than that? And Ticket to Ride. But in other games, I don't know if you guys have ever played like Great Western Trail. There's an aspect of constructing buildings. Where do you put those buildings? Moving your person through routes. At 2 different sets of actions on buildings. Buying a deck of cows. Using that deck of cows to get money to buy buildings, to buy people, to get more buildings, to get better cows, to move your train, to get to train stations to score points, to pick up objectives to score points. Yeah, you see what I'm getting at? I think the kind of, almost if you were to draw nodes of different mechanics and link them together in a web, the more complicated the web, the heavier the game.
Why heavy? Why that word?
Because it makes you think.
Because I'd probably have called it complicated, but not heavy. But that's,
well, I think
that's just me and my very... I don't think they're synonymous at all. But that's just me being a pedant with words. They're only synonymous to you because you use them to mean the same thing. If you take them out of the context you're using them for, they're not synonymous whatsoever.
When someone said heavy board game to me the first time, I understood exactly what was meant.
Like, lead is heavy, but it's not complex.
Yeah, but when someone said heavy, I got the concept. I didn't need to think about it. I don't know why I did, but I had no... Someone said that very early on when I was playing board games. I was
That's
like,
heavy,
you mean, like,
man.
A tough one, okay.
Blame stoners.
So that is obviously me being a pedant and being someone who's not as ingrained in the community as you guys, but that's not what I kind of get what you mean. It's not synonymous, it's certainly not. It just is within the context. And I think you need the context to understand that.
I mean, on Board Game Geek, complexity is marked as heavy, severity. How difficult the game is marked. I don't particularly think it's a word that's used within the community uniquely. I guess that it's important to be able to differentiate between a particularly heavy game and something that is light and you can whip out with any other user. It's important to be able to know what games will work with somebody who's played the hobby, been part of the hobby for half a decade, and someone who's new to it. They've seen the recent Guardian articles promoting board games, and they want to play it. You get something more entry level, I suppose, to play with them.
So true.
It's also somewhat elitist, don't you think?
Unfortunately,
like, the term entry-level game is really cringy, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I prefer gateway games.
Yeah, gateway games sounds better.
But it's not necessarily an entry point, I don't know, it seems really disparaging to people who don't play complicated board games. Oh, this is an entry-level game. This is an entry point game. This is, as in, you're going to start here and then work up to it. Some people just want to play those games.
No, I fully understand your point there.
And I know people don't mean it that way. But one of my favourite games is Lords of Waterdeep. And, when I didn't know Will very well, and we're talking about board games, he's got this huge collection. And I was like, I fancy playing Lords of Waterdeep, maybe. And there was a sort of tone of voice, it's an entry-level game. I'm like, as if it was somehow inferior. And it certainly was not meant that way. And I don't think a lot of people who are very into the hobby get how elitist or condescending it can sound to people who aren't. Yeah, and that in no way is supposed to be a reflection on Will, but it's a common thing across the hobby.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
I agree.
In my defence, when I first met Mike, he told me that he wanted to play a really heavy game, and then he suggested playing Waterdeep, which I wouldn't consider a particularly heavy game. Waterdeep is brilliant at what it does. There are other more complicated games that do the same thing, though, and when he had told me that he wanted to play a heavier game, Waterdeep wasn't the first game that came to my mind. I was like, oh, really? Okay. But then I played the games more. I have a huge collection of board games, whereas Mike's only really just starting out.
So I was going to say, I think there's a thing there as well, and it depends the kind of circles you move in. So by comparison, the board game community has had a lot less of this, as far as I've been concerned, than the wargaming community. And I grew up being a complete and total Warhammer nerd, and was very involved in that. And there's stuff, all these kind of criticisms can also be levelled against that community. But I found coming into board games that when I knew nothing, and I think it's probably... Well, when I knew nothing, Jon Snow. But, when I was getting into board games, I didn't know anything about board games. I had a few friends with the old board game. There were some people who were really strong into Catan, and that was about it. So I never really heard these terms early on, and I don't sit on Board Game Geek very often other than to just check a review. So Ameritrash is a term I probably heard in the last year or so. Euro's more common phrase that I hear. Like, I've never heard someone use entry level much until very recently. In fact, this conversation is the most I've heard the phrase entry level. I think Gateway is a nice game.
And I remember speaking to my friend Henry about this. Henry's the only person I know with a big board game collection than Will.
Oh yeah, it's impressive.
And Henry said that Gateway games are, in his opinion, the best games because you can play them with the most people.
Yeah. I mean, I have many of them in my collection myself. They're brilliant. They do serve a purpose.
I think a gateway game is good because it opens up your mind to what is possible to be done with games. Where if you're coming from the perspective, you assume that a person who is new to a gateway game has only ever played things like Monopoly.
And then you go to RP and realise that you can do literally whatever you want.
Yeah. So that's why I think the term gateway is good.
I mean, as an example of why gateway games can be good is like, I would come back with all sorts of board games or ask for ones at Christmas, and my mum would be like, what the hell is this? But one Christmas, I took King of Tokyo and Ticket to Ride back home, and my mum loved both. She was happy to play them. She understood them. That was it. Like, she hasn't then gone and bought really heavy games, but that's the type of game
in a really
she likes,
similar vein, my mum has always said she likes board games. Now, that is a casual statement. That is not a board gamer statement. She likes Monopoly and some old game that we used to have.
Filthy casuals.
She loves Bananagrams, actually. In fact, she showed me Bananagrams. There's a fun, quick game. But I took Lords of Waterdeep up, and my stepdad said, I don't like board games. He's been adamant about this for years. He doesn't like board games. He doesn't like playing board games. But we convinced him to play Lords of Waterdeep with us. And they had great fun. And they thanked us the next day after sleeping it off and stuff and just saying, thanks for bringing that over. We had a great time. You should bring it over again next time. And I said, you know what? I'll bring this and something else. But I think Lords of Waterdeep stands on its own, though. Not just as a gateway entry-level game. It's just a good game.
It is a good game.
But you see, that's the thing. There are so many good board games out there that there's something for everyone. You just need to find what your niche is, what it is you really like. And if it hasn't been designed yet, it will eventually be designed.
The only reason to reproduce it is to sell it under a different IP and attract more people to it. Catan. Munchkin is the absolute worst for it.
Sod Munchkin right up its munch arse.
That is a strong opinion.
But Munchkin has a place almost as a gateway game, because how did I get into board games? One of the reasons was Munchkin. Because we were role players, which, depending on how you draw your lines, you might consider as way nerdier than board games. I think probably
certainly a greater investment of time.
Yeah, and so I came from that and D&D, and the fact that there were D&D themed Munchkin was great. The fact there was a James Bond themed Munchkin was great, even though it's with the serial numbers rubbed off. But it was set in those kind of worlds, and that made them funny, and that's why we played them. And nowadays, I have several copies of Munchkin that very rarely get played unless I'm with people who are specifically asked me to bring them.
That being said, I quite enjoyed Munchkin Quest the one or two times I played it.
It's a long game, though.
Oh, it took us forever that one time.
I like long games. Long games appeal to me. I like games where I can plan long term.
You can't plan long term in Munchkin Quest. You can't even see the rooms.
Yeah, but I still like it. That's a separate point. So, moving on for this from heavy versus light. Board and touching back on Eurogames slightly, the hobby is going through a renaissance. It is surging. It accounts for something like over 50% of Kickstarter's entire revenue.
Over 60.
Good.
That's enormous. It's exploded massively, and Ticket to Ride has been touted as one of the things that prompted a resurgence in board games, and therefore, as a consequence, Eurogaming. As like Will says, whenever you see a new mechanic, it's usually a European design. How much of this do we think is contributing to the hobby? This sudden surge in new ideas and creativity, rather than simply another version of Monopoly with a different theme or IP, or another version of Risk with a different IP.
Well, we still get a new version of Monopoly nearly every other month, so that hasn't quite ended yet. But no, it's been great. We are getting more and more games, we are getting more and more players, incredibly diverse communities are growing. It's beautiful, almost.
I think it's great. I mean, I'm still seeing games, and you see a mechanic in it, and you think, I've never seen that before. And that's awesome, considering I've played at least 200 different games, probably more. And it's still really cool that I can come across a game and go, I've not done that before in a game.
Yeah, it's obviously very cool. We're here discussing board games because we love them. But I think it's interesting. It's one of those things really hard to piece together. When did this resurgence start, necessarily? I mean, I was already into board games when Tabletop came out on YouTube, which has definitely pushed more new people. I think Tabletop alone has helped. Yeah, Tabletop on its own must have helped, but I think it's this thing a lot of things are seeing where...
And for those of us that don't know what Tabletop is...
Oh yes, Tabletop is Will Wheaton's YouTube... it's essentially a TV show. It's a YouTube show where he gets together famous nerdy celebrities and they play a board game each week. They explain
famous
the rules,
being a
very
relative
high production values.
He invites YouTubers.
Yeah, but they're famous. Yeah, I mean, they're not all YouTubers. That they will be famous actors, or they'll be people from TV shows. You know, the kind of people he knows, and that helps draw in a different audience than just Will Wheaton alone. I mean, not everyone is a massive Star Trek fan, so you know, that was one thing that encouraged me to try a lot more stuff. And I definitely had a period where I basically, if it appeared on Tabletop and then I saw it at a decent price,
I mean, that's why I bought Small World,
and that worked quite well.
This sounds stupid. Do you think the Big Bang Theory had anything to do with it? Because that had an episode with Settlers of Catan in it, and I reckon a lot more people will have watched Big Bang Theory.
I think it probably helped Settlers of Catan.
They also had the episode where they had like a trading card game tournament between Will Wheaton and Sheldon. So that has also helped. I think Big Bang Theory has just helped in general with geek culture, no matter how cringeworthy it can be sometimes.
I think what you're touching on is a bigger picture here. It's not just the Big Bang Theory, it's culture. So, and this is just to touch on roleplay slightly, because I've got way more experience with roleplay than board games. Roleplay is to me what board games are to Will. I'm very passionate.
I like role-playing games too.
You're seeing, but I like them.
I GM'd for you for a bit.
Lot. You're seeing in media a lot more acceptability of it. You know, Community did 2 D&D episodes, Big Bang Theory's done at least one. You're seeing it in media. The Stranger Things was a hugely popular show that opened with a D&D game. You're seeing geeky things, and it starts with superheroes, and then it's Lord of the Rings, board games, and all this stuff is being shown in media, not just because look at this dork, we're going to beat him up. And they're being made to look fun.
Yeah.
Rather than the way they used to be presented in the 80s and 90s, where any character in any form of media that played D&D was there because they had no social life and were trying to escape into fantasy world to hide from reality. And this is honest to God how a lot of people get started in things like that. But that's not all it is. And it should be shown to be fun, not just some sort of crutch for a miserable life. And that's what they do now. It's socially acceptable to be a nerd. It's socially acceptable to roleplay. It's socially acceptable to play board games. It's not just for dorks. And that is awesome.
At the same time, there's a whole generation of dorks, or whatever term you'd like to use, from the 80s and 90s, which are coming through now, and they're becoming adults, and they're popularising it. It's what they
I don't
want.
think dork is a thing you choose to be. It's not been reclaimed in the way geek or nerd has, where people.
And I think that's probably why I chose the word, because it hasn't been reclaimed. But it just meant the same thing 20 years ago.
Yeah. And I think, to add on to that, there's obviously, as people have pointed out, people coming through who are nerdy and geeky and influencing all these things we watch. But I think another thing with board games for me is I used to play a lot of not LAN games, but I used to play a lot of console games where you get 4 to have 2 to 4 players playing around the same machine together. That's the thing I did.
GoldenEye
with lots of friends. GoldenEye, perfect example. And with board games, it allows me to do that with possibly more people than the average console allows, because you've got the party games go up to bigger numbers. But there's two benefits. One is it allows me to do that in a world where a lot more games are now online, and so you don't have that person-to-person interaction. And the other thing is, board games, with the exception of some of the very long ones, are generally kind of a bit more pick up and play, less planning. You don't need as much time. I don't have whole weekends to devote to playing games every weekend like I used to when I was a kid. Now I have the time to play maybe 1 or 2 games of an evening, and that's another thing board games are really good at fitting into.
Yeah, and to touch on that as well with the video games point, video games used to be something where you'd sit around split screen or a couple of screens in a house. And despite the fact that every console seems to have 4 controller ports, very rarely do they support more than 1 controller. Oh, you can play you can play this multiplayer, but only on multiple consoles, so you have to buy 4 consoles and 4 copies of the game. Like, there's no reason that first-person shooter games should not be able to be played local multiplayer. But instead, they're all multiplayer, but only online. And they're going, oh, it's more social than ever, and it's not. It's actually less social. Because you can't have your mates around. And I think board games, for me, are filling that gap a lot, like you said.
It's interesting that you mention video games as something that you used to spend an awful lot of time doing, because there was a whole generation of people who got to experience the massively multiplayer online role-playing games, and maybe they were before sitting in front of consoles playing split-screen games such as GoldenEye, and they've gone away and they've discovered online communities and they've built friend circles there. But as time has gone on, that whole format has become less appealing, and people have moved back maybe towards the more direct social interaction that you can have from board games or other activities.
Also, like, MMOs are being replaced with MOBAs in general, which are far more competitive and toxic environments, and there is less huggy community. So maybe they're looking for that elsewhere. We're speaking about some of the designers, the way they design and market games. We wanted to discuss the influence of some designers and what they've had on the game. And I mean, like, we've discussed the merits and flaws of Munchkin. Steve Jackson's probably had quite a big impact on introducing people to the hobby.
He's designed so many games. Munchkin still generates a stupid number of money. Every year I read Steve Jackson's kind of report to the shareholders, but it's not actually the report to the shareholders, because no one owns any shares in Steve Jackson Games except for him. He owns the company. And he writes this little... They're very fun to read. They're different to your normal company kind of communications. And I think that's probably a theme amongst board game kind of community, that they're not like what you see as a traditional corporate company.
Yeah, the designers tend to be very personal, don't they, with their communication.
But, like, he always points out, it's like, Munchkin is 75% of all our revenue, or whatever it is. It's a stupid number. And he kind of got a bit depressed about just kind of selling always Munchkin, and that's why he did the ridiculous Kickstarter for Ogre.
And different versions of Munchkin as well. Like,
yeah. And I mean, obviously, he does it because it's his job and he makes money out of it, and that's fine, but he obviously wants to design different
there must be very little
Munchkin.
creativity for him in designing another version of the same game.
Which is a shame, because one of his other designs, Illuminati, is perhaps the single game that convinced me to get into the hobby.
Alright, and you want to talk about Ogre, Tom?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, Ogre was a thing... Ogre was initially a miniatures game, and, well, no, before it was a miniatures game, I believe it was just pen and paper with a little hex.
And I remember you getting really excited about your delivery of Ogre. Before I started really board gaming, when I'd only played 1 or 2, entry-level games, to use air quotes. And I remember seeing you posting on Facebook how excited you were to receive this.
Yeah, I mean, it was the first big Kickstarter I went for, and I can't even remember how I found it. I may have come to it via Penny Arcade or someone like that. So we'll touch on this later, like how do you find out about board games? Because you've mentioned Board Game Geek on there. But I heard about it like almost by word of mouth, and I went all in. I had the spare money at the time. It cost $190, including shipping, because it's a beast.
Wow.
It weighs like 12 kilos. It's a massive box. But to me, the draw came from a kind of wargaming side of things. So I was like, I was in the process of selling all my Warhammer off because I didn't have anyone to play with. I might have the odd players I knew, but I never had the time to paint it.
And to briefly, just because these points are so beautifully laid into things, mention the fact that Will said board games do not lose their value anywhere near as much as some other things, Warhammer being one of them. You can only sell Warhammer for a fraction of what you bought it.
I managed to sell all of my Warhammer for roughly its RRP.
Then you are very lucky.
But its RRP was half its original RRP. Like, the inflation of Warhammer prices is crazy. So yeah. I was selling it for like half its current price. But yeah, I sold all that Warhammer off, and I still have that desire to play tactical strategy games. That's what it is. But it was like, here's a war game in a box, everything in the box, and you got loads of expansion like material thrown in because you were kickstarting it, and that's why I went for Ogre. And I had an evening where I just had some friends over, and we popped out all the pieces and built everything, and I think we played like one game. It took us like 4 hours to open everything up, and that was a lot of fun. And inviting people over to do that with me was also a lot of fun.
You accidentally used the Imperial Inches side, and therefore had a like double range advantage on me, and absolutely thrashed me. But it was fun nonetheless.
Yeah, I won by miles because we misread. As you say, there was one side is like hex movement, and one side is in inches, so you can play it as a true miniatures game.
So that's Steve Jackson. I mean, we touched in the last in the Gen Con episode on the CEO of Fantasy Flight Games.
Yes, Christopher Peterson.
How important is he to the hobby?
The owner of Fantasy Flight Games.
In its entirety? Does he own all of it?
I'm not sure, actually. I know he's definitely the CEO.
I was going to say, you can be a CEO of a public
limited
company. You know, you can have
not
no shares and be a CEO.
Thing. But yes, he launched the company with his first hugely successful design, Twilight Imperium, and he's produced an awful lot of other strategic games, some of which you may have heard of and played, such as the Game of Thrones board game.
Oh, that's a great game.
You know, and I've not played the Game of Thrones board game, but I have played Scythe, which I greatly enjoyed. And I've been told that they're similar games, except the Game of Thrones board game has better combat. That's what I've been told.
There's more combat because it's inherently geared that way in a way that's whereas Scythe
they're
is
not
aimed
similar
away from
games.
Cue the copyright claim.
Nah, mate, I was way too out of tune for that to be copyright claim.
Yeah, and he's also produced other heavy strategic games, such as Forbidden Stars, which is itself a re-theme of the StarCraft board game.
God, I could not get into that game. Is it hugely popular because of the IP or because of the mechanics?
I'd like to say they're hugely popular because of the mechanics, but we can't really undervalue the value of the IP of both the StarCraft universe and Warhammer.
Also a huge IP.
But Fantasy Flight Games is a massive company. It's not just Christopher Peterson's games they are producing. They are producing all sorts of other games, like Mission Red Planets. Hugely successful.
In fact, they have enough influence that Games Workshop recently pulled an IP from them because they were so influential and they were producing a product they saw as a competition.
That they form part of the larger Asmodee umbrella, which I suppose is the evil megacorporation, not necessarily evil, the megacorporation that has been forming in recent years around board gaming.
That means nothing to me, though. I have no idea what
they own lots of board game companies.
Oh, they're a distributor. That, like I mentioned, they're an umbrella corporation. They've been buying up other board gaming companies from around.
Is this a recent acquisition?
No, I don't think their Fantasy Flight Games purchase was recent. I think it was about 3 years ago now.
So, other important designers?
UA Rosenberg, Bruno Cavallo.
What did they make?
UA Rosenberg made the incredibly popular, and I'm going to say this wrong on purpose just to piss people off, Agricola.
Agricola.
People pronounce it Agricola. He was also responsible for Bonanza, which is a small little one, and Glass Road. But as I said, the main one is Agricola, which is a huge kind of caveman like survival game where it's pretty much the game that introduced the mechanic of feed your people. Now ever since then, people were like, oh my god, let's make our games feed the people too. Okay, and it's the worst bit about that game.
So one of the things that makes people influential isn't really just how popular the game sold, but it's how many people emulated elements of their design, I'd say.
Oh yes, definitely.
I suppose that's true, yeah. I hadn't actually thought about that until right now.
And obviously they're going to emulate the design because it sells well. But, what's more important is how much people are emulating them, how much of an impact they've had on board game design, rather than simply how much money have they made.
Uwe Rosenberg is also the designer of Patchwork and Cottage Garden, which are incredibly cute.
Cottage Garden is a sweet game.
Yes, they are sweet, but they're built around tile laying, and Patchwork in particular is like a 2-player game where you have tableaus in front of you and you have pieces of quilt, which you're essentially taking turns choosing from and building your own patchwork quilt. It's incredibly sweet. And collecting buttons. It's almost resource management because you have the time. Time is a resource. However many, each piece has a time cost and a button cost, and the buttons are points, but the time dictates how many more actions you have in the rest of the game.
So, moving on slightly, another individual is listed for an article they've written, an employee of FFG, Bruno Faiduti.
Yeah, I don't know.
Obviously, I've pronounced that wrong.
Yeah.
We're going to link his blog post, but he identifies some key trends in board games over the last decade and ways in which the board gaming landscape has changed in terms of design. Will, you're the most familiar with this article. Do you want to sum up some of the key points, and we'll discuss them individually? So if you make your first point, we can discuss it.
Sure. It's an excellent article. It's a very good read. I can strongly recommend that you go away and read this article. It's in both French and English. He's a prolific designer. Prolific.
Are you sure he's not a profiterole? Because
he's the designer of games such as Mission Red Planet, Citadels, Masquerade.
Oh, right. So is he the guy that's behind the pick a person that will determine your turn order mechanic?
I don't know if Citadels was the first game to have role selection as a mechanic.
But role selection determining turn order.
Even for turn order, I think there were games that preceded it, but it's definitely one of the most popular, and it recently had a new edition published. The first thing he talks about in this blog post is just the massive growth of the hobby in numbers around the number of players, the number of games which are being released. The amount of money involved has also risen considerably.
Have you got any numbers behind that, or are they just in the article?
Yeah, sure. I'll look up the numbers for you and provide them to Tom to paste in his show notes.
Awesome.
If not, we'll just be like, it has grown.
Yeah, we like statistics, though, don't we, Tom?
Yes, we do.
The hat of many things contains many things. Some of those things are statistics.
Pointy statistics.
The second thing Bruno identifies as a major trend in the hobby is the influence Kickstarter is having at bringing more people into the hobby, making it more accessible, making games that wouldn't otherwise be producible.
And a lot of them make more money on Kickstarter than they do otherwise, don't they? Like, a lot of them actually make more money being backed than they do from selling after the fact.
Yeah, and if they get their they have to balance what bonuses they're going to give to those Kickstarter people against like the cost of producing it on their own and doing all of that. But if they pull it off, they do make a lot of money.
I mean, the main part about Kickstarter is it cuts out the middleman, the actual... so you have a link direct to the designer and the money that he's sourcing and the people who are going to buy his game. So you cut out all the distributor layer. I mean, there are designers which have built up their entire reputation on Kickstarter. There are designers which have gone from producing their first game on Kickstarter to releasing every game on Kickstarter. And, for example, Ryan Lockett, the designer of the family of Red Raven Games, he started on Kickstarter, he produced his first board game on Kickstarter, and now he's even distributing for other designers via his own Red Games that he's built up over time on Kickstarter. He's built a following.
And this is why individual reputations become super important. Because when board gamers look at Kickstarter, they go, oh, okay, why should I back this? Why should I have any faith that you're going to deliver it? That you're going to deliver it to a high standard? That it's going to be something new and interesting, that's going to have replayability? And the honest-to-God answer, most of the time, is because I've done it before. And you enjoyed the game I made, and you're going to have to trust me and take an interest in what I'm showing you. Because you cannot play a Kickstarter game before you pay for it. You can't play it at a friend's house and go, I'm going to get a copy of this.
You can often access the
You have to put a lot of faith in the people, especially if it's their first go.
So, how many games have you backed on Kickstarter, Tom? Rough number.
It's less than 5, I think. But, as you say, I started off with well-known designers. So Steve Jackson's Ogre was one of the first ones I backed, but took the longest to arrive. I've also backed Thunderbirds, which was by Matt Leacock, who is famous for doing cooperative games.
Matt Leacock, famous designer of Pandemic and Pandemic Legacy.
And Thunderbirds is a cooperative game. Just happened to have a theme on it that I really enjoy, and also an excuse to buy some models to paint up for my dad's birthday. And I also backed Galaxy of Trian, which was I don't think they'd done anything on Kickstarter when they did that one. I think that was their first Kickstarter, and that was one which I put more faith into, but it was after I'd trusted Kickstarter as a way of getting things. I then branched out to more interesting games.
Wade, how many games have you backed?
0. I haven't backed a single game on Kickstarter, but I have bought a game that was funded through Kickstarter.
Which one was it?
That was Roleplayer.
Will, how many?
I'm counting them now. This might take a while. Come back to me.
Okay, I've backed 3. They've all been this year. I'm relatively new to the hobby. But time for your big breath. Tom, you considered Ogre a hefty investment.
Yep.
I put
You're going to blow it out the water.
I put £850 into Kingdom Death Monster 1.5.
That's more than my computer cost.
Just, burst out my head.
Oh, before you launch into Kingdom Death Monster, I have a count. 20!
Wow.
Okay, let's list mine. It's going to be quicker. Okay, so I've backed Kingdom Death Monster 1.5 to a huge degree. And what is scary is that my backing amount is probably around the average.
I'm sure there are people who have backed more.
Kingdom Death Monster is a specific target niche game. And I'm not a hardcore board gamer compared to some people, in that I don't have a big collection, but it is a hardcore game made by a guy that loves hardcore games, who will not compromise on anything, who constantly adds delays to his production because he wants to micromanage everything to the highest possible quality and detail, from the miniature design to the game mechanics to everything, to the delivery boxes and the padding. And he will not compromise on his vision, to the point where on his initial Kickstarter he made a loss. But was it the 3rd highest Kickstarter of all time? Never mind board games, Kingdom Death Monster 1.5. It raised about £12 million over a surprisingly small number of donations. There are games that had way more donors that made way less money.
It's a goalpost that keeps moving. Like, when I backed Ogre, it was the equivalent. It was the ridiculous game of its time, and now that's blown it out of the water. And I'm sure there'll be something else which comes along.
But to compare it to the second highest board game, which I believe was Exploding Kittens, which we'll get back to.
Exploding Kittens has over 200,000 backers.
Which we'll come back to. What is the difference between backer numbers and then value, though?
10 times that number.
So 20,000 people invested enough money in this game to blow 6 times their number out of the water. 10 times their number out of the water. That's how high the average pledge for Kingdom Death was and how anticipated it was as a game.
It also kind of reflects on the quality of both games, in that Exploding Kittens is a card game and Kingdom Death Monster is a very high quality miniatures game.
Yes, but Exploding Kittens caters to a very specific audience, so it was going after that Cards Against Humanity audience, which hadn't really been catered to on Kickstarter before that time. One of the other top 10 games on Kickstarter, most backed, is Joking Hazard, which is a little cartoon building game based off the Cyanide and Happiness series.
So, and to flash out my other 2 games, I've backed Cool Mini or Not's Rising Sun, based on 2 factors. Yeah, so that's based on 2 factors. One is I've played Blood Rage, which I greatly enjoyed and had great quality minis. And the second is that it's just beautiful, physically, aesthetically. I'm going to have great fun painting those minis. Even if I never play the game, I'm going to have great fun with those minis. And the last one is Reload, which is a MOBA. I really like playing MOBAs online. I like playing League of Legends. Reload is the second version of Load, which is a board game with fairly good reputation, which plays like League of Legends. You have 3 lanes, 5 champions, 2 teams, regardless of how many people are playing. Destroy each other's base, get gold, upgrade your champions on the way through. So that sounds fun. But the core theme in all these games is the minis for me. I love making and painting things. I love things like Warhammer, but they lose their value. They're hard to resell. They're hard to find people to play with constantly. The rules constantly change. Whereas these, I'm going to have consistent games. I'm going to have a nice miniatures collection, and I can use them all for D&D as well. It'll be great. But minis are a huge selling point for me, and Will knows this. Will see a game with minis, and he'll link me, and I'll go, oh, I want that. I don't even need to know how the game plays. And this is one of the things that this gentleman from Fantasy Flight Games points out, is that miniatures and the rise of CM, Cool Mini or Not, is that miniatures sell games because they're aesthetically pleasing.
No, he doesn't point that out, Mike. Sorry, that's my musings on what he's saying.
Yeah. Right, it's in the notes. God damn it, Will.
I'm sorry, Michael.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I was misled. I was led astray, Will.
I'm a corrupting influence.
I like miniatures.
Yes, you do.
I find it therapeutic to paint.
You have an awful lot to paint in the coming months.
And I think there's a huge reason for this as well. And I think it's that people spend 40 to 45 quid on a board game with no minis, right? And they feel like they've spent an awful lot of money on some cardboard. Okay? But when you get high quality minis for an extra 10, 15, or when you get tactile pieces in some of these Kickstarter editions, your version of Near and Far, where you've got little plastic gems and little metal coins, the whole game becomes a much richer, more rewarding experience. It's pleasing in a sensory manner. Not just the game's mechanics, it's not just your brain, it pleases your sense of touch.
Yeah, people like component quality. I have definitely purchased games because I've seen the component quality is good.
And it adds to the game. It in no way changes how the game plays whatsoever.
Yeah, no.
Logically, it makes no difference, but sensorily, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it pops a lot more.
I think maybe a difference to draw on here as well is in video games, you often get those nice collectible editions that come with something, and those sell quite well, but most of the time I can take it or leave it unless it's a particular franchise I love. Whereas with board games, improving the quality of the components, there's something I'm always going to be touching and playing with, and I'm like, ooh, so that's this feels better. Like, it's kind of almost at a subconscious level sometimes. Sometimes you go, those miniatures are amazing, but a lot of the time it's just that subconscious, this game is better somehow.
I mean, you have, at the end of the day, it's just an added value to what you're getting in any board game that you purchase, which I suppose is why people go for the miniature board games over, I don't know, games where the miniatures could all... I don't think there's any game where the miniatures couldn't be replaced with cardboard chits.
Just keeping time in mind here, because it is getting late. Another point, we wanted to discuss some of the culture within board games. We've already discussed a certain degree of Elysium. Elitism. Elysium is a very different thing. Elitism.
That's a different game.
A degree of elitism. The swell or the entry level games. To what degree is it owned by certain age groups?
I think there is a generation of board gamers who started way back in the 80s playing what were still very classic. They've almost become classical games at this point, classical Euro games. And over time, there was a gap in the 90s where there wasn't as many board games. At the advent of Hasbro, the Monopoly being put out all the time. And then we've had the Renaissance now. And so there's an age gap. There's board gamers from 30 years ago, and there's the board gamers who are arriving in the hobby now. And unfortunately, particularly amongst some of that old guys, there is a very we had it better attitude that the old classics are the best, despite all the new material which is coming out now. They still want to play that Stefan Feld game from the 80s. They still want to play the original version of Twilight Imperium. The second and third editions were just ridiculous oversimplifications of their game.
Which is something to get with RP as well. Just, I know I bring it up a lot, but you get simulationists versus simple systems focused on narrative.
Which is sad, really.
Yeah, and this is a form of revanchism, isn't it? That you've or how do you even say that, man? You're French, you tell me.
Revanchism. I mean, Twilight Imperium is 20 years old. The original. Cosmic Encounter, even older.
Is that how old Twilight Imperium is?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Axis and Allies must be quite old,
that's
right?
a good shout. Stratego.
Am I right in thinking a lot of the 90s games were very Ameritrash in terms of, like, very conflict-driven?
Most of the 90s games, I would say, were what Hasbro was at, whatever Hasbro at the time was putting out. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a really strong time, I feel. Someone will, of course, tell me, like, this epic 90s game, which I'm just not aware. Sorry. Contact the Hat of Many Things with your 90s games.
Which is fucking stupid. Excuse my French. Yeah, we've used a bunch of French words now. We've used revanchism, baguette, and fucking. Because surely nobody needs to protect their hobby from new people. Surely the whole point of doing something is to enjoy it with people, and the more people enjoy it, the better it is.
I mean, I guess it could just be the people I've been playing with. I've known board gamers who are very protective of them. They're not too keen on the younger people coming in. The younger people, they tend to shout at meetups. They're not particularly friendly towards them. They're nice enough people, don't get me wrong. Some of them are incredibly nice, in fact. But some of them are like, oh no, I can't stand that group of people, all those youngsters playing these young games.
My question, Will, is where have you met these people? Is it just at particular meetups? Because as someone who's... I appreciate I'm newer to the hobby than you are, but I've never met people with this
Yeah, it might even be geographical.
Said it out loud at any rate.
Most of the board game meetups I've attended were in London, although I have played across the southeast and I've experienced it in those places as well. So take that as you will. No, southeast of the UK. We're UK based.
Or are we?
We're in Atlantis. Yes. Board gamers in Atlantis. In space.
In space.
We are in Atlantis in space. You heard it first here, folks. And back to Exploding Kittens. We did want to come back to this in the notes. This gentleman, Fiduti, he lists Exploding Kittens as a game that has no value. Obviously, 220,000 people disagreed.
So, Bruno, in his blog post, states that Kickstarter has brought lots of good to the hobby, but it's also brought lots of bad. And as an example of that, he states Exploding Kitten as a game which has no value whatsoever. I disagree.
How do you determine that? That's such a stupid thing to say. Do people enjoy it? Then it has value.
Yes, of course, people enjoy it. I think he's getting at this mechanically. It doesn't have any value to the hobby. It hasn't brought anything new. But I think it's fine. It's a light implementation of a push-your-luck game with cards. It has a silly theme. That will appeal to a great number of people, especially the people that it was marketed to through Kickstarter.
That's like saying that no one should play Cards Against Humanity. It's a stupid game, but people enjoy it.
Yeah. Exactly, it's a stupid game and people enjoy it.
Yeah.
And that's all it needs to be. It doesn't need to be anything more. And to say it doesn't have value is being, I feel, maybe hypercritical. And I think this comes into the protectism that certain people have in the hobby. Like, they're dismissive of these lighter games. I know I can be dismissive of lighter games, but even the developers can be dismissive of the lighter games.
And it's only fun because of the people you play it with as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You will play that with a group of friends who are there that evening, maybe slightly inebriated, to enjoy that game.
So, rocketing through some final points. We mentioned language and lexicon, acronyms, people not understanding certain words, and that being a barrier to bringing new people into the hobby. Do we think that was maybe an intentional barrier with some people? If you discuss your revanchism?
I'm sure there are people who put words on because that's what they do, but it's like with any culture that exists online.
There's always some elitism.
Well, there's elitism, but the other thing is, if you're writing a lot about something online, you will want to shorten that down to a phrase that you know. And, if you're involved in a hobby of any sort, or even at work, you'll have code for things, so you'd have to say the full length word. That's the whole point of abbreviations. So,
are there any words that we think everybody that wants to play board games should know? Are there any absolute must-knows? We've been through Euro and American. Deck builder.
Wade loves deck builders.
Choose cards in order to create your own personal deck of cards.
How much quicker was deck builder? There you go. That's why.
Yeah, but I mean, we're explaining it to people. That's the point of this. But that's why we're doing this.
Yeah, I think maybe describing the different game types like we did at the beginning is worthwhile, but quite a lot.
Yeah, but we didn't actually describe it mostly. We just listed.
I know, but half of them, like deck builder. While not every, I'm not going to say it's so obvious that everyone will get it, but you could probably guess what deck builder is. You can probably guess what worker placement are. With an example in front of you, you should get those terms very quickly.
Yeah, but only with an example in front of you. If I turn around to my mum and said it's a deck building game, she'd go, what? If I then got the cards out of the box, she'd go, oh, I have to build a deck of cards. But the cards are a really necessary bit of context to that.
Yeah, but it's like if you say, oh, he's a Lannister to someone who doesn't know about Game of Thrones.
Deck builder does not say anything about cards. You have to understand the cards are there in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's because they simplify a huge amount of complexity. They're shorthand terms, and they're all pretty explicit. If you were to put one of those board games in front of one people and see it, then it should make sense.
Okay, but if we could get rid of one term, what would it be? If we could just purge it. Would it be entry level?
Ooh. Entry level?
Yeah, I'd get rid of entry level as well.
But Gateway Game replaces it. Like if we had to get rid of a word as opposed to a concept.
Noob.
Probably noob, yeah. But noob is not just a board game. I think people say noob
word.
In all sorts of contexts.
That's a gaming as a whole.
Yeah, it's a bad thing to use. It's a bad thing to use in general, okay. But specifically when it's used to describe new players in a way that's attacky. Antagonistic, that's the word.
I think I'd get rid of the word legacy. There are a lot of games that came in that were legacy games like Risk Legacy, Pandemic Legacy, but as time has gone on, it's become more and more of a buzzword. People are introducing legacy elements into their game when they're not really. They're just transforming their game into a campaign game, and I think that's introducing confusion into the hobby. Inaccurate ways of describing your games.
Yeah, whereas a campaign game is what? It's a legacy game that's replayable. It's just infinitely better.
Yes.
Okay, we've discussed how important aesthetics are to us. We could put in the show notes some of our favourite pieces of board game art, some of our favourite board game peripherals. Now, for a slightly more personal anecdote, and we're going to start with Tom here and then roll round. Tom, best board game experience. What's the most fun you've ever had playing a board game? Just top of your head. It doesn't have to be the best. Just come up with one really.
No,
fun
I know. I'm just trying to think. I think one that is really, because I played it again recently, different mission. Wade and I have been playing Time Stories with Beth, and because she owns it, and we played it once when Wade came down, and we just got to sit there and play 3 sessions back to back, do the whole game. And there was a moment in there, and I'm going to try and do this without spoiling. There's a moment in there where you think you've got a pretty good idea of where the mystery is going, and then you get given an item. And then when you flip that item, you realise the game has completely changed. And it was one of those kind of eye-opening moments that I haven't had in a long time. I'm sure there was one I had when I was playing games earlier, when I first got into board games. I was like, oh, board games can be more than Monopoly. Is that kind of like, oh, there is a lot more to this. I thought this was easier, and now it's changed. And like that kind of rush you get when you're like, everything has changed. We need to work through this as a team. But it's a very good cooperative game from that point of view. I know some people have complained about the final rounds of it, but we didn't find that.
And worst experience? Don't name names.
I can't remember if it was Munchkin or Munchkin Quest that we played.
Really? Was it not the strategy game you played that you refused to play again?
I remember you saying you didn't enjoy playing Cosmic Encounter.
That's true. Yes, but the thing with Cosmic Encounter was that was a one-off. I was angry in the moment, and I walked away from it, and it was done. As far as effect on me was, it was like I started playing the game, I got dicked over, and I left, and that was it. I was out of the game. I calmed down very quickly.
You can tell how much he cares because that's the first time we've had to bleep Tom instead of me.
That was a very in-the-moment thing that I cooled down from quickly. I didn't get as angry playing a particular game of Munchkin, but I just remember once we were very tired, and it was just suggested too late in the evening, and we all should have been like, Munchkin shouldn't start playing at 10 p.m. And it went on to like 1, 2 in the morning or something stupid. It was just the longest game of Munchkin, and it was the last time I played Munchkin for a long time until I was playing with some new players who just really loved the idea of Munchkin and because they'd heard of it.
Keeping it a bit quicker now, Will, best and worst experience?
My favourite experience with board games was probably that eye-opening moment when I realised that board games could be so much more than what I had previously experienced. It was playing Illuminati, another one of Steve Jackson's games that we mentioned in passing, where in the rules it's enshrined your right to cheat, so long as you can get away with it. So we were all playing this game where you're supposed to build up networks of secret organisations, and we were all subtly stealing from the bank, but none of us could prove that the others had done it, and that was just such an excellent dynamic. My least favourite experience in board gaming was a game of Above and Below, the predecessor to Neon Far from Ryan Lockett, Red Raven Games, where I was playing that game at a meetup in central London with a group of non-native English speakers. It wasn't that they couldn't speak English, it's just that whenever we got to the storytelling part of that game, I'm not very good at Spanish, and I had to spend an awful lot of time trying to explain the nuances of a piece of story. They loved the game, but yeah, it wasn't clearly designed to be used with non-native English speakers in mind, which is unfortunate, I suppose.
Okay, so for me, I would say best experience. I've had some good ones, particularly with Arkham Horror, but I would say best experience isn't even as I've got back into hobbies as an adult. I would say it was playing Hero Quest as a young, probably about 13-year-old, and it's my first experience with board gaming / role-playing and the sort of crossover in between that it was. It really opened my eyes to this board game is an adventure, not just rolling some dice and going around a board. I would say worst experience is kind of hard. Have I had any outright bad experiences playing games? I think it's maybe just getting bored of games that are too simple, that are getting played too much. There's not enough to the game, and I'm forced to sit there for far too long. Wade?
Just best I can think of on the top of my head was Russian Crush, the racing game, Push It Like a Racing Game, and if I rolled a certain roll, I would probably die, and then I hit a wall, and I was like, shit, if I roll anything but this roll, I'll die, and then I survived. And it was just the most amazing, like, I'm driving a wreck of a vehicle, and I've survived by the skin of my teeth. That was excellent and fun. Then worst is hard, but I'll go with something probably like, probably a game of Pandemic I had where someone was just, as we discussed earlier, was essentially just assessing the whole situation and playing it out for everyone. And I was just like, what's the point of me being here?
That's the key problem that we addressed earlier with the co-op games in general, but I'm going to voice a potentially pipe bomb opinion that Pandemic is just Arkham Horror but boring.
Yeah, Pandemic's not very good. One of my least favourite games.
It's Arkham Horror with all the flavour taken away. That's my opinion on Pandemic. I think we've done quite an exhaustive topic on board games here. I think we'll be cutting a lot less material than we usually do. And there's still more we can talk about. I mean, you know, if we're going to explore board games in the future, we can explore specific games. We can even a Let's Play. There's, you know, the market, how it's being affected by international relations and how it's making it more expensive hobby for some people. There's a struggle of the store versus the online retailer. The struggle of trying to get a group or a play space and combine that with a shop. Some places are doing it very successfully, some places struggle. I've had 2 friends who've tried to open gaming stores and have generally shut it down in less than 5 years due to the struggle of making any money through it. you know, there's a lot of stuff to talk about outside of the games themselves and about individual games, but, you know, we're going to move those on to additional items in the hat. And now we're going to move on to picking our next subject. So, Tom, get that hat off your head, put the paper in it, have a rustle, and tell us what we are going to be talking about.
I will insert a drum roll again. I got... Oh, we've got TV again.
TV. Ooh, subcategory. Is that a drum roll appearing?
We'll leave in one of the non-drum rolls so that people can hear you going... We have got the topic of Game of Thrones.
Well, that's great because, yeah, the finale of the season is in a few days.
Although we will be uploading probably about a month after it, but it's pretty close considering it's topical right now.
Okay, thank you all for joining us on the Hat of Many Things for this episode. We're very glad you could make it. We're very glad that we managed to stretch this out so long. And we're going to try and get our regular uploads going forwards. We look forward to talking about Game of Thrones. We all enjoy it very much. I'd like to thank Will and Wade for joining us, bringing their insight to the table.
Thank you. It's been great to be on. I enjoy rambling on about my passion.
Thank you for having us. May see you again.
And, well, we bid you adieu. Have a good night.
Good night, board games. Good night.
No. Definitely not. I disagree. That can't be right. There's more to it than that. No. Not necessarily. Maybe not. Not. Just no. No.
That was the ending thing. 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 That was the ending thing.